My daughter mocked my 1-200 pension and told me to clean her toilets or face the streets. She didn't realize I was a secret multimillionaire holding the legal keys to her ruin, and I was finally ready to balance the books. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The ribeye steaks hit the good plates with a heavy, expensive thud. I had spent $40 at the butcher on this meat, a stupid extravagance for a man supposedly facing poverty, but tonight warranted a celebration. I had run Peterson and Associates for 35 years, balancing the ledgers of every small business in this town. Last Friday, I finally locked the office door for the last time and handed the keys to the property manager. My chest felt lighter than it had in decades. I was free. I was done. "Dinner is ready," I called down the hallway. My daughter Thelma appeared first. She was still in her work clothes, pulling her hair out of a tight ponytail. Her husband Elmer followed right behind her. His thumbs were moving across his phone screen, his eyes never leaving the blue light. They settled into their usual chairs without a single comment on the table settings or the smell of the seared meat. I carried the wine bottle to the table and filled their glasses, then mine. My hand trembled slightly as I stood. "I wanted tonight to be special," I said, looking from one to the other. "I have big news. As of last Friday, I officially closed the firm. 35 years, and I am finally done." Thelma's eyebrows lifted as she paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "You retired? Just like that?" "Just like that," I said, raising my glass. "To new beginnings." The room went silent, but not the happy kind. Thelma leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Wait, what about your pension? I mean, you own the firm. That must come with a solid retirement package, right?" I lowered my glass and gave a slow, rehearsed nod. "Well, I will get Social Security. About $200 a month. It is enough for my needs. I have never been an extravagant man." The words hung in the air for 4 seconds. Then Thelma's face shifted. A small sound escaped her throat, something between a cough and a cold laugh. Elmer finally looked up from his phone, his eyes darting to mine. 1-200 monthly?" Elmer asked. "That is it?" Thelma let out a sharp bark of a laugh that made me flinch. Her hand flew to her mouth, but her eyes stayed cold and calculating. "Dad, my car payment is more than that. How do you expect to live on 1-200? I set my glass down carefully. The stem felt fragile between my fingers. "I have always lived within my means," I told them. "I do not need much." "Guess you should have thought about that before shutting down your only income source," Elmer said, cutting into his steak. The knife scraped against the porcelain with a screech that set my teeth on edge. Most people plan for retirement. They do not just stop. Heat crept up my neck. I have planned. I have been careful with money my entire life. My expenses are low. I own my car outright. I do not need a lot to survive. "This is actually serious, Dad," Thelma said, her voice dripping with pity and annoyance. "You cannot survive on that. What about medical expenses, utilities, food? You manage fine now because you live here." "Because we do not charge you rent," Elmer added, leaning back and crossing his arms. 1-200 would not even cover a studio apartment in this city. You are in a position to be worried, old man, not celebrating." The celebration I had imagined dissolved like sugar in water. I sat perfectly still while my daughter and son-in-law finished the expensive steaks I had bought for them. Elmer refilled his wine glass and put the bottle back on his side of the table without offering me a drop. "Look, Grover, let's be practical," Elmer said, swirling the wine. "You have a problem, and we have a solution. You can stay in this house. Your room is here. But things need to change." "You need to contribute. Change?" "What are you talking about?" I asked. "You are living here rent-free, eating our food," Elmer said. "If you are not bringing in real income, you need to earn your place another way. Cooking, cleaning, yard work. Think of it as an exchange. We are not running a charity here." The words entered my ears as sounds without meaning. Earn my place. I was the one who paid $75,000 for the down payment on this very house 12 years ago when they could not qualify for a mortgage. "Elmer, I wrote the check that started your life here," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. "I have a stake in this house." "That was a gift, Dad," Thelma snapped, setting her fork down with a sharp click. "You said you wanted to help us. You cannot turn a gift into a loan because you are having money problems now. The mortgage is in our name. The bills are in our name. Frankly, at this point, you are a dependent." The word dependent hung between us like smoke. Elmer started counting chores on his fingers. Breakfast and dinner on the table, bathrooms cleaned weekly, trash out on Tuesdays, gutters cleared. "And if I do not?" I asked. Elmer shrugged. "Then you have decisions to make. There are shelters, senior housing, whatever people in your situation do." I gripped the edge of the table, the wood grain pressing into my palms. Thelma shifted closer to Elmer, forming a united front. Their faces showed no guilt, only the cold reality of servitude. Elmer stood up, picking up his plate. "Think it over tonight," he said. "Let us know your decision in the morning." He walked into the kitchen, his footsteps confident on the hardwood I had helped pay for. Thelma paused beside my chair and touched my shoulder briefly, a gesture meant to soften the blow. "We are not trying to be cruel, Dad," she said, "but we have to be realistic. We cannot support another adult for nothing." She followed him, and soon I heard the sound of the dishwasher being loaded and the television clicking on. I sat alone at the table as the candles burned low, wax dripping onto the cloth I had laid out so carefully. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was a beggar at their table. I stood up and walked to my room, my back straight. I reached my door and closed it, locking it behind me. I spent the next hour sitting on my bed, listening to them move through their evening routine. When the house finally went silent, I moved with purpose. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I had kept hidden for years. Inside were 6 property deeds and investment statements totaling $10.5 million. I stared at the numbers until my eyes burned. They wanted a servant? They were about to find out who really owned the ground they were standing on. The morning light was thin and gray as I sat at my small desk. I had slept for only 4 hours, my mind churning through the math of betrayal. I heard Elmer's alarm go off through the wall, followed by the muffled sounds of their morning routine. I stayed in my room until I heard the front door close and their car engine start. Once the house was mine again, I spread the property deeds across the bed. 6 properties, 6 addresses across Portland that Thelma had driven past countless times without ever knowing they belonged to me. I picked up the first deed for a house in the Alberta Arts District. I had bought it cash for $85,000 back in 1995. Now it was worth $650,000 and brought in $2,800 a month in rent. I moved to the next one, a warehouse condo in the Pearl District worth $800,000. By the time I finished adding it all up, the property portfolio alone was worth $4.2 million. Then there was the trust fund. Decades of disciplined investing had turned my small business profits into $10.5 million. My total net worth was $14.7 million. I could buy a villa in Tuscany or a beach house in California today. I could buy this house outright in cash and barely notice the expense, but that would not teach them the lesson they needed. I had lived modestly in this tiny room for 12 years because I wanted to set an example. I wanted Thelma to see that security came from what you kept, not what you spent. Instead, she had learned to worship waste and mock frugality. She thought my 15-year-old Toyota meant I was failing. She thought my silence meant I was weak. I reached into the back of the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder marked 2013 house purchase. There it was, the wire transfer receipt for $75,000. I remembered the day I sent it. Thelma had been 25, crying because she was about to be priced out of the market. I had wired the money the next morning to save her dream. At the closing, she had hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, promising she would never forget it. And now, she was telling me to clean her toilets. I packed a small bag. I didn't need much from this room. I took my clothes, my filing cabinet, and my documents. Everything else, the furniture and the memories, could stay. I left the house quietly and drove to a law office downtown. I had spent the night researching, and I knew exactly who I needed. Robert Chen's office was high up in a glass building on Southwest Morrison. He was a sharp man in a sharp suit who didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the folder on his conference table. I told him about the dinner, the mockery, and the ultimatum. I showed him the deed to the house where my daughter lived. "You are listed as co-owner with 50% interest," Chen said, tapping the page with his pen. "Not as a lender, as an owner." "That is correct," I said. "I paid half the down payment. I want to dissolve the co-ownership." Chen nodded. "Under Oregon law, when co-owners cannot agree, any owner can petition the court to force a sale. We call it a partition action. You have an absolute legal right to demand they purchase your share at fair market value, or the court orders the house sold and the proceeds divided. Based on the market, your share is worth about $235,000, he continued. We start with a demand letter. We give them 30 days. If they refuse, we file the lawsuit." I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check for his $3,500 retainer without hesitation. It was a rounding error in my accounts, but for Thelma and Elmer, it was the start of a financial earthquake. "You should know," Chen said as I stood up. "Once this goes out, there is no taking it back quietly. Your relationship with your daughter will change forever." "It already has," I told him. "They made their choice. I am just making mine." I didn't go back to the house. Instead, I drove to one of my rental units in the Pearl District. A tenant had just moved out, and the 9th floor apartment was empty. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and a kitchen with granite counters. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. This was my building. I owned every brick of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Thelma. "Did you think about our talk? The trash needs to go out tonight." I didn't reply. I blocked her number and the son-in-law's number immediately. I spent the afternoon setting up my desk in the new apartment, watching the sun set over the Willamette River. I felt a strange mix of grief and power. For 12 years, I had played the role of the quiet, aging father. The mask was off now. The next morning, I sent a final email to my property manager. I told him to authorize Chen to speak on my behalf regarding the house. Then I sat back and waited for the certified mail to be delivered. I knew exactly how it would go. The mailman would ring the bell. Elmer would sign the little green card, and then they would open the envelope. The silence of my new apartment was a luxury I hadn't realized I was missing. No more muffled arguments. No more feeling like a guest in a home I had built. I poured myself a cup of expensive coffee and watched the morning traffic below. The 30-day clock was ticking. The call finally came on a Tuesday evening. I had unblocked Thelma's number just to see if she would reach out after the letter arrived. The phone vibrated against the granite countertop, her name flashing on the screen. I let it ring until it almost went to voicemail before I picked up. "Hello, Thelma," I said, my voice as level as a ledger. "Dad? What is this?" Her voice was high and tight, bordering on a scream. "We just got a letter from a lawyer. You are suing us?" "I am not suing you yet," I said. "The letter is a formal notice that I am exercising my rights as a co-owner. I want my $235,000 $. "Your rights?" "Dad, that money was a gift. You said it was to help us. We do not have $200,000. Where are we supposed to get that?" I stood by my window, watching the lights of the city flicker on. "That is not my problem, Thelma. You have 30 days to figure it out. Buy me out or we sell the house." I heard the phone being muffled, then Elmer's voice came booming through the speaker. He had clearly grabbed the phone from her. "Grover, this is insane. You are really going to do this? You are going to make us homeless over a grudge?" "It is not a grudge, Elmer. It is an investment. You told me I was a dependent. You told me to earn my keep. Well, I am cashing out. I own half that house, and I am taking what is mine. We will fight this," Elmer yelled. "We will get our own lawyer and prove it was a gift. You cannot just kick us out." "Actually, I can," I said. "My name is on the deed. Ask your lawyer about a partition action." "And Elmer? Legal battles are expensive, very expensive. How much do you have saved for that?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I knew exactly how much they had saved. I had seen their panicked bank statements years ago when I bailed them out of $23,000 in debt. They lived paycheck to paycheck to maintain the appearance of success. "You will never see your daughter again," Elmer spat. "You are dead to us." I have not really seen her for years anyway, I replied. I have only seen a woman who looks like her but treats me like hired help. Goodbye, Elmer. I hung up and turned the phone off. I didn't want to hear the strings of texts that I knew were coming. I sat in the dark for a while, the only light coming from the city outside. My heart was thumping, a physical reminder that I was still alive and still capable of fighting. I wasn't just an old man waiting for the end. I was a man who had built an empire, and I was finally using its power. The next few days were a flurry of activity. I met with Chen to finalize the court filings in case they didn't respond. But I had another move to make. I remembered a conversation from a year ago. Elmer had been bragging about his cash work on the side. Handyman jobs, construction help, all off the books. He had called it beating the tax man. I sat at my desk and pulled up the IRS website. I downloaded Form 3949A. I filled it out methodically. Name, Elmer Hayes. Estimated unreported income, $15,000 a year for the last 3 years. I didn't feel bad about it. Elmer wanted to talk about everyone contributing their fair share? Fine. Let's start with his taxes. I mailed the form from a post office across town. By the second week of July, the desperation started to show. Thelma began calling her friends, trying to borrow money. I knew this because one of her friends, a woman named Sarah, who had always been kind to me, called to check on me. She told me Thelma was asking for $50,000, claiming I had gone senile and was attacking them. Sarah, I am not senile, I told her. I am just tired of being invisible. The banks were the next stop for them. I could imagine the scenes. Thelma and Elmer sitting across from a loan officer, their credit scores bruised from years of car loans and credit card debt. They needed $235,000, but their debt-to-income ratio was a nightmare. No bank would touch a second mortgage that big, especially not with a co-owner who refused to sign the paperwork. They were trapped in a box they had built themselves. They had assumed I would always be there, a silent ATM and a live-in maid, never dreaming I had the teeth to bite back. On July 11th, the second strike landed. The IRS letter arrived at their house. I knew the timing because Chen's office had been monitoring the public records. Elmer was being audited for the last 3 years. The pressure was mounting. They owed me a house, and now they owed the government thousands in back taxes and penalties. I spent my days walking along the river, eating at restaurants I had ignored for years, and enjoying the quiet. I was 63 years old, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have to care about anyone else's numbers. Thelma showed up at my new apartment on July 14th. I don't know how she got the address, but I suspect she followed me or found the property records for the building. When the doorman buzzed me, I hesitated, but I wanted her to see. I wanted her to understand the scale of her mistake. "Send her up," I said. The elevator opened directly into my living room. Thelma stepped out and stopped dead. Her eyes swept over the 2,800 square foot space, the leather furniture, the original artwork on the walls, and the view that looked like a postcard. She looked diminished, her eyes red and her clothes wrinkled. "How?" she whispered. "Dad, what is this?" I was standing by the kitchen island, a cup of espresso in my hand. "It is my home, Thelma. I own this building, and 5 others just like it. You own the building." Her voice cracked. "But you lived in that tiny room. You said your Social Security was 1,200. You lied to us. I told you my Social Security amount," I said, my voice cold. "I never said it was my only income. You assumed I was poor because I didn't flaunt my money. You assumed that because I was quiet, I was also penniless. But why live with us then? Why stay in that room?" "Because I wanted to be near my daughter," I told her. "And I wanted to see if you had learned anything about value. I thought if I lived modestly, you would see that happiness doesn't come from a new car every 2 years. But all you saw was a target for your contempt." "Dad, please," she sobbed, sinking onto the edge of my couch. "We are going to lose the house. The IRS is auditing Elmer. We are going to be ruined. Please just drop the lawsuit. We will apologize. You can come back. No chores, I promise. Forgiveness requires remorse before the consequences, Thelma, not after. You are only sorry now because you are cornered. You were perfectly happy to treat me like a servant when you thought I had nowhere else to go." "We were wrong," she screamed. "We were cruel, okay? I know that now. But we are family. Family doesn't offer their father a choice between cleaning bathrooms or living in a shelter, I said. I am moving forward. You have 10 days left on the demand letter. After that, Chen files the partition suit and the court takes over. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. You are a monster, she whispered. No, I said. I am an accountant. I am just balancing the books. She left, and the silence that followed was heavy. I knew Elmer would be furious. I knew he would try to find a lawyer to fight me, but I also knew the law. Titled ownership is a hard thing to break. By July 23rd, they realized no bank would help them. They hired a cut-rate lawyer from a strip mall who filed a weak response to our demand. He argued that the $75,000 was a gift and that I had abandoned my interest by not paying the mortgage for 12 years. Chen laughed when he read it. Non-contribution to a mortgage doesn't negate title, Chen told me over the phone, and a gift of cash for a down payment doesn't mean you gifted the ownership interest. We are filing the lawsuit tomorrow. The next morning, the partition action was officially on the court docket. It was a public record now. Anyone who looked up their address would see a pending lawsuit. Their credit was officially toasted. Their ability to sell the house to anyone but me was evaporating. I spent that evening on my balcony watching the boats on the river. I thought about Timothy, my grandson who had passed away years ago. During his illness, I had spent hundreds of thousands on his care. Money Thelma and Elmer never knew came from my trust. We had been a family then, united by grief. But after he died, the gulf widened. They started filling the void with things, and they started seeing me as a reminder of a past they wanted to forget. The first hearing was set for August. I knew it would be the end of their life as they knew it. Elmer had already lost his job. The stress of the audit and the lawsuit had made him a liability at work, and his company had let him go. Thelma was working double shifts at the hospital, her face aging a year every week. They were learning what it felt like to be powerless. They were learning what it felt like to have no options. It was a brutal lesson, but they had written the curriculum themselves. The courtroom was small and smelled of old paper and floor wax. Judge Patricia Morrison presided, a woman who looked like she had seen every family feud in the state of Oregon. I sat next to Chen, while Thelma and Elmer sat with their lawyer. Elmer looked like he wanted to jump across the table and strangle me. Thelma just looked empty. Judge Morrison didn't waste time. She looked at the deed, then at their lawyer. Mr. Hayes, you are arguing that because your client paid the mortgage, the plaintiff has no interest in the property, she asked. That is correct, Your Honor, their lawyer said. It was understood to be a gift. The law doesn't care about understandings, the judge snapped. It cares about titles. Mr. Peterson is on the deed. He owns 50% of that property. Unless you can show me a signed agreement where he waived that interest, this is a clear-cut case. She looked at me, then back to them. The court orders an immediate appraisal. The defendants have 45 days to buy out the plaintiff's share. If they cannot, the house will be sold at a judicial auction. The gavel hit the wood with a finality that made Thelma flinch. It was over. The house they had bragged about, the house where they had tried to enslave me, was no longer theirs to control. Outside on the courthouse steps, Elmer finally snapped. You think you won, he hissed, leaning into my face. We are going to walk away with nothing. We have to sell just to pay the IRS and your damn lawyer. You are destroying your own daughter. You destroyed her the moment you taught her that money was more important than respect, I told him. You have 45 days, Elmer. I suggest you start packing. The following weeks were a slow-motion collapse for them. The house was listed, but the market had cooled. Buyers saw the court-ordered sale and smelled blood. The offers that came in were low, barely enough to cover the existing mortgage and the realtor fees. Thelma moved out in mid-August. She couldn't take the fighting anymore. Elmer had started drinking, his rage turning inward as his world vanished. She filed for divorce 3 days after she left. The house that had been their dream had become a prison of their own making. On August 20th, their realtor called me. They had an offer for $445,000. After the mortgage of $280,000, the $50,000 predatory loan Elmer had taken out to pay the IRS, and the fees, there would only be $98,000 left. Split between us, they would each get $49,000. They had spent 12 years paying a mortgage, and they were walking away with less than the $75,000 I had given them at the start. I sat in my apartment and looked at the numbers. I didn't feel happy. I felt a profound sadness for the waste of it all. All they had to do was treat me with a shred of dignity. All they had to do was say thank you for the steaks. Thelma called me on the 25th. She was staying in a tiny apartment her friend had found for her. Her voice was small and fragile. "Dad? Can I come see you?" Just me. I told her to come over the next afternoon. When she arrived, she didn't look at the view. She didn't look at the expensive furniture. She just sat on the edge of the couch and cried. "I am so sorry," she sobbed. "I am so sorry. I was a terrible daughter. I used you. I let Elmer talk to you like that because I was scared of being poor. I thought if we didn't have your money, we were nothing." I let her cry for a long time. I didn't offer a tissue. I didn't move to hug her. I just watched her face. "I didn't do this to ruin you, Thelma," I said finally. "I did it to wake you up. You were living a lie built on my bank account. You needed to see what it was like to stand on your own feet." "I have nothing now," she said. "I am 37 years old, and I have nothing. You have your job," I said. "You have your health, and you have a chance to be someone worth knowing." I pulled a document from my desk. I had been preparing it since the court ruling. It was an offer to buy her share of the house for $200,000, well above what she would get from the sale. "This will pay off your debts and give you a start," I said, sliding it across the table. "But it is not a gift. It is a buyout. You take this, you move on, and you never ask me for another dime. You build your own life." She looked at the paper, then at me. "Why would you do this? Because you are my daughter," I said, "and because I want to see if you can finally learn the lesson." She signed the paper with shaking hands. We didn't hug when she left, but she looked me in the eye for the first time in years. There was a spark of something there, not the old entitlement, but a flicker of real strength. I went back to the house in Southeast Portland one last time. It was empty now. Elmer had cleared out his things and disappeared to another state. I walked through the rooms, looking at the marks on the walls where their life had been. I stood in the kitchen where we had eaten that final bitter dinner. I had my dignity back. I had my house back. And maybe, just maybe, I had my daughter back. I walked out the front door, locked it, and didn't look back. I was 63 years old, and my life was finally my own. The house felt like a hollow shell as I walked through the quiet rooms for the first time as the sole owner. Every floorboard I stepped on was a reminder of the thousands of dollars I had poured into this foundation while being treated like an intruder. I set my coffee on the same dining table, where Elmer had once counted out my chores like I was a child. The silence was the most expensive thing in the room, and for the first time in 12 years, it was mine. I had officially bought out the property for $200,000, effectively ending the legal tug-of-war that had shredded my family. I spent the morning in the garden, pulling weeds that had grown thick while Elmer neglected the yard. The physical labor felt grounding, a stark contrast to the years I spent balancing ledgers in a stuffy office. My hands were dirty, but my head was clear. By noon, a white envelope was stuck in the iron grate of the front door. It was a final notice from the municipal tax office addressed to Elmer. Even with the house sold and the marriage dead, his past was still hunting him. I didn't open it. I simply placed it on the counter, a relic of a man who no longer existed in my world. My phone buzzed and I saw a notification from a real estate app. One of my Mississippi Avenue properties had a water heater issue. Usually the management company handled it, but today I wanted to see the building. I needed to look at the concrete proof of my survival. I drove the Toyota through the city, past the coffee shops and galleries that had sprouted up around my investments. Standing in front of the Mississippi Avenue building, I watched the tenants, young professionals who looked just like Thelma and Elmer used to. They were busy, hurried, and likely living on the edge of their means. They didn't see the old man in the faded shirt as the owner of their reality. When I returned home, the shadows in the hallway seemed longer. I realized that while I had reclaimed my house, I was still living in a museum of my own grief. I went to the small bedroom I had occupied for over a decade. It was empty now. The filing cabinet and desk moved to the larger master suite. I stood in that narrow space and felt the weight of every night I had spent there, calculating my worth while being told I was worthless. I picked up the phone and dialed Chen. "Robert, I need to make sure the divorce filings didn't leave any loose ends on the property title," I said. He assured me everything was ironclad, but mentioned that Elmer's lawyer was asking for a delay on the final payout. "Denied," I said firmly. The clock stopped when the gavel hit the desk. I hung up and walked into the kitchen to find a bottle of scotch I'd hidden years ago. As I poured a glass, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a dark suit holding a clipboard. He wasn't a process server. He was an appraiser from the bank. Elmer had tried to take out a secret line of credit against the property just days before the partition was finalized. The betrayal didn't sting like it used to. It just felt like a number that didn't add up. I handed the appraiser the court order showing I was the sole owner and watched him walk away. Elmer was still trying to bleed a stone that had already turned to diamond. I went back inside and sat in the dark living room. The house was finally quiet, but the air felt charged. I realized that having the money wasn't enough. I needed to decide what the next 30 years would look like now that I wasn't anyone's dependent. September arrived with a cooling breeze that rustled the leaves in the backyard. I had turned the formal dining room into my personal office, the space where I could finally track my millions without hiding the screen. Thelma had been calling more often, not asking for money, but asking for advice. She was living in a small studio, learning the hard way that $1,200 a month really was a tight squeeze for someone with her habits. "Dad, I didn't realize how much light and heat cost," she said during a call on the 10th. "I've started taking the bus to save on gas." "It's a start," I told her, keeping my voice neutral. She invited me to lunch at a small deli near her new place. I agreed, but when I arrived, I saw she wasn't alone. Elmer was sitting at the table, looking like a ghost of the man who had laughed in my face. His suit was wrinkled and his eyes were bloodshot. Thelma looked caught between a plea and a panic. "Grover, please," Elmer said as soon as I sat down. "The IRS took the last of the settlement. I lost the apartment. I just need a place to stay for a month while I get back on my feet." I looked at Thelma. "Did you know about this?" He waited for me at the door. "Dad," she whispered, "he said he has nowhere else to go." I turned back to Elmer. 12 years ago, I gave you $75,000 to start your life. 5 years ago, I paid $23,000 to save your cars. 2 months ago, you told me to clean your toilets or go begging." "That was just talk," Elmer stammered. I was stressed. "No, that was your character," I said. I finished my water and stood up. "Thelma, I'll see you for coffee next week." Alone. I walked out of the deli without looking back, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was the first time I had seen him since the courtroom, and the sight of his desperation didn't give me the thrill I expected. It just felt like a closed account. When I got home, I found a message from Chen on my machine. The final property transfer for the St. John's house was complete. I now controlled every square inch of my portfolio again. I decided it was time to sell the house I was currently in. It held too many memories of a family that didn't exist anymore. I called a realtor I'd worked with on my commercial deals. "Listed at $480," I told him. "I want it gone by the end of the month." That evening, I began packing the few things I had left in the house. I found a box in the attic filled with Timothy's old toys. I sat on the dusty floor and held a small wooden block he used to play with. Grief is the one thing money can't audit, and I realized I had been using this legal war to avoid feeling the hole he left behind. I decided then that a portion of the investment trust would go toward a pediatric wing at the hospital in Timothy's name. $10 million was far more than I needed to live out my years in the Pearl District. I wanted his name to mean something more than just a folder in a filing cabinet. As I was loading the car, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Elmer. It was a man from the state auditor's office. He was looking for Elmer Hayes regarding an ongoing investigation into construction fraud. "He doesn't live here," I said, handing the man the divorce decree I kept in the glove box, "and he hasn't for a long time." The man nodded and left, but the interaction left a bitter taste in my mouth. The second strike I had launched with the IRS was turning into a full-scale demolition of Elmer's life. I had asked for justice, and the world was delivering it with interest. Hampray. The auction for the house took place on a bright Tuesday morning. I didn't attend. I watched the final numbers come through on my laptop while sitting on the balcony of my Pearl District apartment. The property sold for $465,000. After the bank took their cut and the lawyers were paid, the remaining balance was exactly what I had predicted. Thelma's check was mailed to her new address. I included a short note. This is the foundation. Don't let anyone else build on it but you. She called me that night, her voice thick with emotion. I got the check, Dad. I paid off the credit cards. I have $30,000 left. I'm going back to school to finish my degree in hospital administration. I'm proud of you, I said, and for the first time in a decade, I meant it. The next day, I received a final letter from the IRS regarding the referral I'd made months ago. Elmer had been ordered to pay $14,000 in back taxes and penalties. He had also been flagged for further investigation into his unlicensed contracting work. He was effectively barred from the industry in Oregon. I felt a brief flash of the old anger, remembering him swirling my wine and telling me to earn my place. But the anger was followed by a strange sense of exhaustion. I was tired of being the hand of fate. I sent Chen a final payment and told him to close the file. I spent the rest of the week traveling to my properties, meeting the managers in person rather than through emails. At the St. John's house, I met a young mother who was struggling to make the deposit. I looked at her, seeing a shadow of Thelma 20 years ago. Waive the first month, I told the manager, and fix that porch railing. The manager looked surprised, but I just walked away. I had millions in the bank. I didn't need to squeeze every penny out of the people living in my buildings. I had spent 30 years being the man who balanced the books, but I wanted to be the man who balanced the scales. I returned to my apartment and found a small package at my door. It was from Thelma. Inside was a framed photo of me and Timothy, taken a few months before he got sick. We were in the backyard of the old house, stacking blocks together. I looked happy in the photo. Not rich, not powerful, just happy. I placed the photo on my desk, right next to the property deeds. It was a reminder that the most important things I'd ever built weren't made of brick and mortar. That night, I had a dream about the dining room table. But in the dream, the stakes were perfect, the wine was flowing, and Elmer wasn't there. It was just me and Thelma, talking about the future without any numbers between us. I woke up at 6 a.m., a habit 35 years of work wouldn't let me break. But instead of reaching for a ledger, I reached for a travel brochure. I had lived my whole life in Portland, watching the city grow while I stayed in the same small rooms. It was time to see the world I'd been paying for. The October rain tapped against the windows of my Pearl District home as I finished packing my final suitcase. I was leaving for Italy in the morning, not to hide, but to finally live. The apartment was pristine, the river view as stunning as the day I moved in. My investments were automated, my properties managed, and for the first time in my 63 years, I had no one to answer to but myself. Thelma came over to say goodbye. She looked different, lighter somehow. She was working as an intake coordinator at a local clinic while she studied, and she'd managed to pay her own rent for 3 months straight. "I'm proud of you," I said, handing her a spare key to the apartment. "Use this place if you need a quiet spot to study, but don't move in." "I know, Dad," she laughed, and it was the sound I'd missed most. "I like my little studio. It's mine." We sat on the balcony for an hour, watching the fog roll over the Willamette River. We didn't talk about Elmer, or the IRS, or the $75,000. We talked about the coffee in Florence and the history of the buildings I owned. She was finally seeing me as a person, not just a source of funds. When she left, she gave me a long hug, a real one, with no hidden agenda. I watched her walk to the elevator, and I knew she was going to be okay. She had been forged in the fire I had lit, and she had come out stronger. I spent my final evening in Portland reviewing the documents for the Timothy Morrison Memorial Pediatric Wing. I had signed the papers to donate $2 million to the hospital. It was the single largest check I had ever written, and it felt better than any property purchase I'd ever made. The phone rang one last time. It was an unknown number, and I almost didn't answer it. Grover? It was Elmer. His voice was weak, breaking through a bad connection. I'm in Idaho. I'm working on a ranch. I wanted to say you were right. About everything. I didn't feel the need to twist the knife. I hope you find what you're looking for, Elmer, I said quietly, and then I hung up. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires an investment of energy, and I had withdrawn all my capital from that relationship. I walked through the apartment, turning off the lights. I stopped at the window and looked at the city one last time. I had spent my life as an accountant making sure everything balanced, every debt was paid, and every asset was accounted for. I had been treated like a beggar in a house I built, and I had fought back until I stood on the summit of my own life. At 63, I had finally learned that the most important ledger wasn't the one in my filing cabinet. It was the one in my heart. I had reclaimed my dignity, saved my daughter, and honored my grandson. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. I didn't look back at the properties or the numbers. I walked out into the cool morning air, ready to start a chapter that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with being free. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.